Welcome, Vanessa. Thanks so much for joining us on the show today.
Thanks, Sally. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Listen, I love this series where our colleagues talk about their own stories of going to college. It's just been fascinating, every single one that I've done. So I really appreciate you talking about your own. And I know that, like, what are some things that you might highlight right off the bat that you think, particularly that our listeners might find useful and helpful?
Well, I applied early decision to read, and I think that the experience was pretty unique, given that I'm a first generation college student, college graduate. I did a lot of the research kind of on my own, and also it was sort of happenstance that I even heard about Read. So I think talking a little bit about the early decision experience, I think that could be useful. I also just think in terms of finding a niche at a small liberal arts college, which to me, I wasn't super familiar what liberal arts colleges were. Happy to chat about that as well. I did the Running Start program in Washington State, and I think having a little bit of community college experience was kind of a nice transitional experience for me. I got my Associate of Arts degree as a high school student concurrently with my diploma, and I just kind of made that transition to a rigorous four-year institution a little smoother.
So let's actually start with that, because I think that's kind of interesting. Like, we can kind of do it in maybe somewhat in order of how things happened in time. So in general, at private colleges, I like to make sure that our listeners know this. We make it clear that programs like Running Start are not, you're probably not going to transfer most of your credits, and it's not always honestly as rigorous as like AP or honors courses at a lot of high schools. But it clearly, in your circumstance, Running Start was 100% the right thing to do. So why don't you talk about why that was helpful to you as a first generation daughter of immigrants? Like, what was helpful about that in particular?
Yeah, just to give a little bit of background too, I grew up in the Los Angeles area, but we moved to a really rural part of Washington State when I was halfway through my freshman year of high school. So a part of the attraction of going to Running Start was also just being in kind of a larger community again. The culture shock of being in such a small town just never really settled for me. So my high school was really tiny, and it was a small town called Zilla, and we only had about 83 people in my graduating class. Not a whole lot of APs, not a super rigorous high school environment. So part of the attraction of going to Running Start was just being kind of in a bigger community and having access to more classes. So I took some anthropology classes I loved, a lot of English courses, and it was just exciting to connect with professors and get a little bit more of the rigor from that piece. So yeah, that was a big draw for me.
Yeah, and I think that highlights, like, one of the places where Running Start is really wonderful. And Running Start is dual enrollment for people in other states. Is just for schools that maybe are under-resourced in some way or another. It really gives students access to courses that they might not have access to otherwise. And I like the notion of the larger community. I hadn't really thought about that. Did it feel more kind of college bound also than your high school? Was that a helpful piece of it too?
Yeah, a lot of the high school students who were there were just really dedicated students, really excited about college. I actually heard about Reed through another high school student who was a year ahead of me, and he was just brilliant. And I was thinking he was going to go to an Ivy, and when he told me he was going to Reed, I was like, I've never heard of that place. So that's how I actually found out about Reed. But I also just love the diversity of the community, like, all sorts of ages, backgrounds. And I did some theater through the community college as well, and that was really fun to do theater productions with all ages. And yeah, I love that.
So you were really immersed in the community. You weren't just taking a couple, were you full time there or?
Yeah, I did full time for the junior and senior year. I took a couple classes at the high school as well, but I did full time, like all my core classes and stuff at the community college.
Okay. All right, great. Okay. So this is really helpful right off the bat. Were you able to access like advisors, et cetera, at the community college? Or was it more informally through the professors and other students?
I did have access to an advisor each year, but I also connected with professors, especially within the disciplines I was excited about. So I talked to the English professors a little more closely, the anthropology professors, and they helped me kind of prepare for Reed as well. Just they knew about Reed, and they were helpful to start thinking about potential majors and things like that. So that was really nice.
Okay. All right, great. All right. So let's talk about your decision to apply early decision, because that is a pretty unusual, tell me about how that happened.
Yeah, so in retrospect, having my admission experience now, I don't know if I would have applied early decision. I think that I might have taken a little more time to explore some other options. I mean, it turned out perfectly for me because Reed was a great fit, but essentially, I didn't have the resources really to travel a whole lot at the time, and it was difficult to get a sense of a lot of different types of schools. And I was a pretty strong student. I think that the counselor at my high school was like, she'll be fine. She can kind of just figure it out for the most part. So we visited University of Washington for a program, like a journalism day program. And I had kind of idealized it in my head as a potential school because I'd always wanted to go to Berkeley when I was living in California. So I thought maybe a big public school would be a good fit. But when I visited UW, I quickly realized this is just way too big for me. Like I'm gonna feel lost here. So I was a little unsure, what other alternatives would be a good fit that I can actually visit. And when my friend David from Running Start mentioned he was going to Reed, we were able to visit in the summertime. And visiting in the summer has some drawbacks. You don't get the full experience of what a day-to-day life for students would be like, but they did a great job of really fleshing it out for visitors. Like I did an interview, the info session and tour were really informative. I actually interviewed with Christine Sawicki, our colleague now, and that was just such a nice touch, the personal touch. So I just was left with this amazing feeling like this is my place. I think I could be really happy here. So I decided to apply early decision, based on that experience. I think, I would advise students now to, even if you have that feeling, make sure that you look at a few more schools too, because there are a lot of schools that can be a great fit, but it turned out really well for me because Reed was a great fit. So
yeah, I've actually told students that applying early decision doesn't just mean visiting that school. It means visiting other schools as well and making sure that this is still the right place for you, that you're willing to make that kind of commitment. But I am very glad that it worked out for you.
Yes. I think the confirmation of visiting additional schools is so important. So I think that everyone should definitely do that, but it worked out well for me, fortunately.
And so let's talk about working. Like I know that you worked already in high school. I know that you did work study at Reed. Are there ways in which that was made academics more challenging, or conversely ways that it benefited it, or maybe both?
Yeah, a little bit of both. I think it benefited for the most part. I think what it made more challenging for me was to have a really robust social engagement with extracurricular activities. Like I was involved with the Latino Student Union. There were a few, I was in a theme dorm, the film dorm, which kind of gave me that social connection piece. But with academics being, quite rigorous, and then the work that I would be doing, it was just hard to do much more than that. Fortunately, the work I was doing was really fun. Like first I started in the library, and I mean, it's just a pretty great place to work in the library. So I loved working there. And then I also worked in the print shop. So I did that closer to when I was graduating, and I got really close with the print shop folks, the staff there, and they actually printed some of my theses for free as a gift. And it became like a little family. It was really just nice. And I also did some babysitting for professors, and I was a research assistant. So I think it gave me confidence that I was connecting with these mentors, not just professors. I did have some awesome professor mentors as well, but some staff too, that just made me feel like Reed was my home even more so.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, actually the studies have shown that working up to like 20 hours a week, I mean, not all schools are as rigorous as others, but in general, working up to 20 hours a week seems to correlate with higher grades at most places. And I'm somebody who worked every year I was at Reed, and it did expand the community to include adults. So I really think even if students are very busy, even if they find something that they just do a couple hours a week, it's so helpful.
Right. I completely agree. And I think it gives you inside knowledge into different components of the college experience. So I just got more comfortable in the library. I mean, we all spend a ton of time there, but I got to know it like the back of my hand. I knew all the great spots to study, and, where all the books were for every department. And it was just a nice way to be connected to that part of the community.
I always thought that I should get a job at the library because you could study. Like if you were a late night, I mean, because Reed, the library was open until 2 a.m. I don't know if it was the same when you were there. Vanessa and I, by the way, went to the same school, just like a couple decades apart. And yeah, like the people who were there kind of in the core of the day were quite busy, but the last like 1 or 2 people who were there, like they were studying, which was great. I thought I should really do this, but I kept doing other things instead.
Yeah, there were always quiet times. Like if I worked in the summer, when you were shelving books, if you got done with your books that you were
Mhm.
shelving, you could just sit and read for a while. It was pretty nice.
Yeah, yeah, really, really nice. Yeah. And anything else? I mean, you also mentioned participating in the New York City Teaching Fellows program after working in admissions. And
Mhm.
so you worked in admissions as well, huh? So let's like flesh that out. How did you get your job at admissions? I mean, we all come at it differently. A lot of us were tour guides, which is how I got into it. Then I became an intern and then they hired me. How did you move into it?
Yeah, I was one of the few people I think that didn't really have a connection to the admission office before working there. I did have a really good friend who worked in the admission office though, and she was saying she thought it could be a good fit, and they were looking for folks who could maybe work with the multicultural recruitment piece. So I was excited about that, and
Mhm,
fortunately the interview went well. I had, Christine was again on the interview team, which was really
mhm,
cool, like full circle right there.
mhm.
So yeah, I loved working in admission. I had an amazing region. I had New York down through DC pretty much, and then Hawaii, which was incredible. So I got
Amazing.
to
Yeah.
see, yeah, for somebody who hadn't traveled a lot, I kind of hit a goal line
How
there.
did you
So
get Hawaii? Usually
I
it's the
know.
senior people who get Hawaii.
I didn't ask too many questions. I was just
You're like,
grateful.
okay, I'll go to
Like,
Hawaii. Like,
oh,
that's
if I
fine.
have to, I'll
Yeah,
take
exactly. You
it.
probably got lucky that most of your colleagues had like kids at home and so they couldn't make those sorts of trips. That's the only thing I can think of because I only had Hawaii for 1 year and it was like when I worked at another institution, it was because I was really senior. So,
Yeah, I
um,
was very, very fortunate, and I had it the entire 4 years. So I was very grateful for that. And it was just such a great way to see different parts of the country as well. So
mhm,
I really loved my region. And I just, as I would travel more and more to New York, I just kind of fell in love with New York City more and more. And I loved working in admission, but I also wanted to help students become more prepared for places like Reed and
mhm,
highly, selective, rigorous institutions in general. Sometimes there would be a big gap with the passion that they had, and maybe like their essays weren't as strong. So I was kind of thinking, doing some English, being an English teacher could be a good fit. So I found the New York City Teaching Fellows Program. It was an excellent fit as well. You get your master's concurrently while you're teaching, so it's a lot of work for
mhm,
sure, but it's a nice way to kind of just jump right into the field. And then yeah, so I did that for 6 years in New York, and it was really fun.
mhm. Yeah, and again, a big change from a rural high school, although you had lived in Los Angeles before. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So let's talk though. I mean, I think it's really useful to hear because you both came from a background from an under-resourced high school. You were first generation, and then you worked in admissions, and then you taught students from that kind of a background, although not small high schools. These were urban but still under-resourced high schools, I think, right? And since
Correct.
then you worked at a high school, or you worked at a school at least in Walla Walla, so I'm guessing that was probably not, it's a small city. So kind of talk about what are some tips that you would give students who are maybe in your situation, who were sort of going to college without a lot of the assistance kind of at home necessarily, or from a high school counselor.
Yeah. So in all of the environments that I worked in, I think there were students who would need a little extra support, and those who would seek the support were the ones who did best. But I think some of
Mhm,
the students who just felt nervous, or like they should know these things and they didn't want to, attract too much attention or something like that, they wouldn't always go in for help. So that's something I would just tell my previous self as well, that
mhm,
just because you're doing well academically, it doesn't mean that you completely understand the way admissions works, doesn't mean that you know kind of how to access the admission office. So that's another piece that I would definitely tell all students in general, that admission offices, they're there to help. I mean, they're gatekeepers as well, but I think something that brings admission counselors a lot of joy is to clarify and kind of demystify the process for students. So
mhm,
when you're visiting, come with questions. Even just talking to students now, a lot of them are nervous to ask, like, can I ask
mhm,
what is a what are they seeking from an applicant? And I'm like, you can ask those things. They don't want it to be all closed off. So,
mhm,
but I think also from counselors at school, teachers at school, just seeking that support.
mhm. Yeah. And even getting help, like once you get to college, I think if you're struggling in your classes, they want you to succeed. Colleges want you to graduate. Colleges look bad if you don't graduate. So
Completely.
please, even if it's something like, I can't afford to buy my books, tell somebody and they will try and help you with it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just knowing the resources at the school, knowing where the tutoring center is, knowing what kind of support services they have, where's the health center, just clarifying where all of that is ahead of time is a really good idea. And, there's not a stigma for getting help. Like there was a political science class that I had a peer tutor in, and it was so helpful. They ended up asking me to be a peer tutor after. So, it just helps so much to get that support when you're in college.
Yeah. Yeah. I as here on College Coach, I talked to this one student who was, she was trying to move from a satellite campus to like the flagship campus. And to do so, she had to take this very rigorous course load. It was during the pandemic, and she wasn't sure she was going to be able to get the grades. And I said, and she was kind of trying to find out if there was another way to do it. And I was like, honestly, not necessarily. Like you're really risking, if you drop one of these classes, you're risking that you're going to stay where you are, which isn't a terrible thing, but it doesn't seem to be what you want. So, I was like, why not get tutoring? And she said, well, I don't need tutoring. And I was like, okay, explain that to me, because you're telling me that you're overworked and you're worried about your grades. And she said, yeah, I can teach myself. It just takes a while. And I'm like, that's a perfectly good reason to get a tutor. Like for some reason, she had it in her head that she had to be like, I don't know, really struggling, not able to understand it. And I'm like, no, make best friends with the people in the tutoring places. And
exactly,
like they were all on the website. I looked it up for her. I was like, go here, go here, go here, and make best friends with these people so that you can get to your goal.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think sometimes students attach a stigma in their head about getting that support, and it's not real. It's something they can relinquish.
Yeah. And they really please do relinquish it. Ask for help if there's something that's getting in your way. All right. So we just have 30 seconds. Is there some last piece of advice that you would give to students applying?
I think just, find your mentors on campus as well. Professors, they are often just really excited to connect with students, like staff, as I mentioned before, older students who can maybe just show the way so that you can find your niche. Just seek that support.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you so much, Vanessa.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Sally.
And thank you also to Stacy and Joy for joining us. Hey, everyone, I think you'll really enjoy our show next week when fellow host Ian Fisher and guests will be talking about the benefits of attending a college that is part of a consortium. In addition, the show will cover next steps for high school seniors who are heading off to college. And finally, I want to remind you that you don't have to listen to our shows live. Every show is accessible 24/7 on the Voice America website. You can also download every show for free on iTunes. And if you want to search for a particular show topic, go to our blog page at blog.getintocollege.com. That's blog.getintocollege.com. And don't forget, we're here every Thursday, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific.